Hey guys, welcome back. So our first line of security will be for authentication, and to implement the authentication features in our API, we're going to be taking advantage of the built-in libraries of .NET Core. So we're going to be making a few modifications to our database context, our startup, and other little things here and there. So let's start off with our database context, where we have to change it from being DB context to now being identity DB context. So this is just another class that allows us to take advantage of the identity services. And when I do control dot, you see here that you have the option to install the package .NET Identity EF or Entity Framework Core. So you just go ahead and find and install the latest version. And then once that is done, we need to make one more modification to our on model creating, where I need to say base dot on model creating. All right, so we have to call the same function in the base class, which is our new base class, and we'll just pass along the same builder object that we are using in the current DB context. Now that's step one done. We'll go over to the startup file and then start making our modifications here. Now what we need to do is configure our identity services to know which class is going to be used to infer the tables that will be generated. So before I move on, let me just backtrack a bit and explain what's going to happen. We're telling our application from the get-go that we want to use our identity services. That's what we're about to do. Now, the identity services will be based on a database connection to, well, a connection to a database that has tables to facilitate identity-related things, user storage, role storage, claims, a number of things. So what we need to do now is configure identity services to know which class is going to inform how the user's table should look, and if potentially there is another one for roles, how the roles will look, etc. So already built in is a user called, or a class called identity user. All right, let me just go ahead and include. So you see it's a legitimate class that's already built in that can be used. Now, if we look at the details of identity user, you'd see that it has fields for lockout, and I don't have to come here, but if you want to get to that point, you can just control click and then continue to control click until you get to that part. All right. So we have these default fields that will come up in the database. As you can see, you have ID, username, email, and password. Well, password hash, right? So those are common fields that any user table needs to have. It's dealing with the hashing automatically. It's always going to have all of that built in, no problem. However, there may be times when we need a bit more information from our users than just email, password, and username potentially. So they allow us to extend the identity user class and put in other fields like we may deem necessary. So I've already kind of started that process. In data, I created this class API user. You can go ahead, right click your folder, go to add, create the new class API user, and then in API user, what I've done is to inherit from identity user. So remember, once inheritance happens, we did that with our DTOs earlier. So we're doing it now with identity user. It's going to automatically inherit all of these fields, as well as any other field that I say I need. So in this case, I just need first name, last name. You could want date of birth. You could want country of birth, area code, other things. Whatever it is you want, you can just extend this class and add them. But it will always have these fields by default. So once you have that class created, you can make two changes. Before we go back to startup, I want to add that class as the context for the DB context. So I'm just using my angle brackets and saying DB context, you're relative to API user, because by default, it's going to use identity user. So if you don't have that requirement where you need more fields, then you don't have to take that extra step. However, it would be good to do that extra step, because later on, if you need to extend it, you can do so without much headache or hassle. All right. So that's one more change that we made to our DB context. Now we need to configure the identity services. So I could do that from here, but I'm going to kind of bring you along another journey now where we don't want to sometimes we don't want to keep on putting in and this startup file just starts to swell and then you have to scroll through mountains of code to find one configuration. So what we're going to do is go over to our project, create a new class. If you want to put it in a folder, that's fine, but I'll just leave it at this level. So I'm going to call it service extensions. And then inside of service extensions, I'm going to have public, static, void, and I'm going to call this one configure identity. So this class is going to be like, it is the service extension. So any bit of configuration that we don't want to burden in this startup file with, we can abstract it to this and just call the methods accordingly. But you'll see that. So I'm going to say this as a parameter, this, and then iService collection, and call it services. All right, include any missing references. There we go. And then this is now going to say that I need to have this as a static class. There we go. All right. So inside of this method, I'm going to have a variable. I'm going to call it builder. So basically builder is just going to be like a amalgamation of us building up the same services that we would have added here. So the same way you would have said services dot and you add this and add that, we can abstract that over to this class and then we just call it on the other side. So you'll see in due time. So we're going to be adding or .add identity core, and then we're passing in the user class. So once again, we're using the custom user class API user. So API user, right? And then open and close brace. And I just need to include any missing reference. There we go. And then I'm going to have my Lambda token where I can customize certain things about how it handles the user interaction. So I can set like password policies right here. I can say that all passwords must require a digit or have a minimum length, use unique characters. All of those things are right there out of the box. However, I'm more interested in just making sure that my user, so q.user and require unique email is true. Right, that's the only one I'm really interested in enforcing right now. However, you can experiment and you can add the others that you feel are necessary. So that is the first line, and then I'm going to say builder is equal to new identity. So most services will come with like a special builder class. I don't want all of that, so I'm just going to say identity builder and include the missing reference. There we go. So new identity builder, give me the builder, right? So that's a builder object that we just started. Dot user type, right? So whatever type was specified, that's what was passing in there. And then type of, because I want to use roles. So the same way that there's a built-in identity user, there's a built-in identity role. So role means, are you admin? Are you user? Whatever it is, that's what that the role means, right? And then after specifying that the role should be there, then I'm passing in the iCollection services object in the form of services. After all of that, I'm now going to say builder dot, and we need to tell it where it should be storing or which database it needs to interact with for the identity services to happen. So I'm going to say database context, right? So the DB context that we're using as our database, we're passing in the matching object for that. And one more line to add default token provider. So I did say we'll be using tokens, but later on we'll flesh out the token bit. I'm just putting all of that there. So just for context, once again, this builder object is really just saying I'm building up the everything that needs to be built up to add to the services. That's pretty much what we've been doing all this time. So here we said services dot, and then we had all of these lines and options and going down. The same thing with the core policy and so on. So now that we've extracted all of these lines to this method or to this class and this method, I can now in startup say services dot add authentication, because that's the first thing I need to add authentication. Right, there's authentication core also, but I'm using add authentication. I haven't had any problems with that one so far, so I'll just stay with it. And then I'll say services configure identity. All right, nice and simple. So services.configure identity is basically what we just did here. So you can start looking at it this way. Anytime we have to add in something to the startup, if it's not a one-liner like this, maybe we can start looking to extract these things to that file and have the builders just send over the object whenever it is called. All right, it's not the end of the world, but different people like to see different things. So some people, myself included, don't like to see bloated startup files. And at least when you have that much code, you have to be scrolling through, and then you scroll past the configuration 5 times before you realize it was there. Those little things can get annoying when your application grows. So I'm just showing you a way that you can abstract too many lines of code from your configuration section and have it in a very confined space. So now that we've done all of that, and we've done all of that setup, what we want to do is do a migration now where we'll add the tables for the identity service. So what we'll do is say add dash migration. We know this part. I'll say added user or added identity. Let's just put it that way. Added identity. And once we do that, we get our migration file. So now when you look through, you'll see the different table names. We have the ASP.NET roles table. We have ASP.NET users table. And if you look very closely, you'll see that in addition to all the default fields that we saw earlier, we also have the custom ones that were added to the class. All right, first name, last name. So when it's going to scaffold this table, it's going to put in our custom fields. All right, just the same way we could have overridden the roles, and if we wanted more information on roles than this, we could have added a custom class, extended it, and it would have done the same. So let us go ahead and update our database. And with all of that done, we have finished our configuration for our identity services. So you can give yourself a pat on the back. However, most of what we've done is in the background. If you want tangible evidence of something being done, you can always check your database and you'll see the tables that have been generated accordingly, right? But our next step is to actually set up the endpoints such that the users can pass over information and get registered as users of our API, and also for them to log in. And then after that, we'll talk about how we continue to verify that this user should have access after they have logged in.